And Courtney, since you have host capabilities, if you could just make sure the speaker is being highlighted when they speak.
So I've got it on
speaker view, I think it should be. I just can't see it from my side because it's
my understanding is that's controlled by the individual, like at their computer.
Yeah, my view will be what gets recorded. So Vanessa, you can set your view however you'd like.
Got it.
Welcome, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to give it a couple minutes for folks to jump on the call. So lovely to see so many of your faces. I want to invite you all to please go over to the chat, share your name as well as the organization you're here representing, or if you're representing yourself. We love that too. Also include where it is that you're zooming in from today. I think most folks here are zooming in from different places in Westchester. We'd love to hear where y'all are from. And as an icebreaker for today, please share when you have, or name one time when you have noticed environmental racism. So this can be something personal to you, something local in your community. It could be the Black and Brown community in a certain area of your city that does not have access to fresh produce, for example. Doesn't have access to fresh food, to supermarkets. It could be a Black and Brown neighborhood that is located in an area with very high traffic, by highway, susceptible to a lot of air pollution from those trucks. It could be it could be a neighborhood that you've seen does not have a lot of lying trees in their neighborhood, or doesn't have any green spaces. It could really be anything, but it is Black History Month, and we are going to be talking about environmental racism today. So I invite you all to share a moment where you've noticed that in your life, in your community, in Westchester, and I invite you all to share that in the chat as we wait for folks to jump on. So again, for folks who are just joining us, I want to invite you all to please share your name, your organization, preferred gender pronouns, the town, city that you're coming from in the chat, as well as to share in a moment where you've noticed environmental racism in your community. We'll give folks a couple minutes to do that. And we are also going to be sharing a survey that we're launching today. As we get to know some of you all, some of your interests, get to know where your knowledge might be at and the issues that WASS deals with, where you want to see our organization kind of put our efforts as it goes to these monthly meetings. So please feel free to, in the next 5 minutes, as we wait for folks to jump on, to share your answer to the icebreaker question and to also fill out the survey so we can have a better understanding on how we can work together in the future. And I'm seeing folks from all over. We have folks from New Rochelle, folks from Hastings on Hudson, the Conservation Commission. We have someone from Terrytown, from Westpac. Both Lisa and Rhea, thank you so much for joining us, our guest speakers tonight. We have folks from Armonk, Sustainable Westchester is here as well. Thank you so much for joining us. So some of the things folks are sharing. The county sewage treatment plant, Geraldine, who lives in Yonkers, absolutely. Abandoned industrial space that was a brownfield right alongside a historic Black neighborhood. Yes, definitely. What else? Have folks seen what other instances of environmental racism? The Tex-Mex border, an EJ tour and summit in El Paso, looked at working conditions along the border. There was a stark contrast. Thank you all so much for sharing. Please feel free to please keep sharing in the chat. And I also invite folks to fill out that survey today throughout the meeting so we can get to know you all a little bit better as well. Some folks are pointing out issues in Florida, drive-through Starbucks next door to public housing New Rochelle, definitely. So we're just going to give it another minute. Folks, feel free to share your name, preferred gender pronoun, organization, the town or city that you're from, as well as answer to our icebreaker. Instance you have noticed environmental racism. And if you do get a chance, do fill out our survey and feel free to fill that out by the end of the meeting. All right, so it is 7:35, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Again, thank you all so much for joining us for our second Zero Waste Task Force meeting. We are very happy to have you here on behalf of WASS, and we're very excited to have two special guest speakers who we asked to come here today to speak on behalf of Black History Month. We thought that it would be really important to highlight environmental justice and talk more in depth about environmental racism. And we're really lucky to have both Rhea Salter and Lisa Burton here. Gonna move this along. So before we jump into the agenda, just gonna go over what we're gonna be covering. We did our icebreaker, and just want to remind folks, if you did not get a chance to fill out the task force survey, please do so before the end of the meeting so we can get to know you and your interests a little bit more. We're going to be doing a really brief intro on environmental justice, the definition of environmental justice, and perhaps a definition that some of us have used in the past, and what we really should be basing our knowledge of what environmental justice is moving forward. Then we'll hear from our guest speakers, Rhea Salter and Lisa Burton. We'll have some time for Q&A. We'll do kind of a quick exercise looking through some of the maps to that kind of distinguish disadvantaged communities across New York State. And then we'll talk about actions that we can take to continue plugging into our efforts as we look to end trash incineration here in Westchester County. So first, what is environmental racism? So how many, I want to see a raise of hands, people, if folks have ever heard of the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice. Do I have any folks here who have read the 17 Principles, heard of them? Now, these were principles that were developed by the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991. We'll be briefly kind of going over those principles. I'm going to ask Mike to also link the principles in the chats just so folks have more time to look back at it. But it's really the framing that we want to have as we look to solve or look to ensure that environmental justice is something that we have in our communities on a local, county, state, federal level. And what we really need to understand is that environmental justice is the movement's response to environmental racism. And Dr. Robert Bullard, who is known as the father of environmental justice and is also one of the pioneering scholars and activists in the environmental justice movement, was once asked, what is the environmental justice movement? And I think he very succinctly said that the environmental justice movement has basically redefined what environmentalism is all about. It's basically saying that the environment is everything, everywhere we live, work, play, go to school, as well as the physical and natural world. So we can't separate the physical environment from the cultural environment. We have to talk about making sure that justice is integrated throughout all the stuff that we do. So again, that's really the framing that we want to have when we think of environmental justice. And we don't, and we want to remember that, again, this is something that's defined by the movement, and shouldn't be co-opted by any other entities that might have kind of their own agendas. And what I've seen, and I think what many of us have seen, is that often the definition that is used by green organizations for environmental justice is one that is used by the EPA. And what we've seen, given their practices, given their history of environmental racism themselves, is that their definition is been put in a way to kind of hijack the environmental justice movement, and that's something that we have to be extremely wary of. So the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit took place in December of 1999. It's been described as one of the most important events in the history of environmental justice movement. And it was a moment where there was coalescing and redefining the very meaning of environment. So no longer did the world connote remote wilderness areas and natural landscapes, as was often the case for largely white environmental organizations. Now, the focus on environmental justice was very much about where one lived, worked, studied, and played and prayed. And this was the lens in which we were to look at ways in which we can be sure to achieve environmental justice. And again, in a way that was collective, that kind of really redefined it to apply to our life across the spectrum, and not just to be seen as kind of this thing outside of us, or the environment that is outside of us, outside of the world that we live, outside of the world that we play, that we engage in. So I don't want to go through the 17 principles of environmental justice because they are quite long. But one of the things I do want to point out is that what you won't find in any of the 17 principles is this idea that if you spread pollutions or toxics around in a better, more equitable way, then this is environmental justice. And this has kind of been the idea that's been alluded by EPA as they define environmental justice, which I've just put on the screen. But the reality is that this is not environmental justice. Environmental equity is not environmental justice. There is nothing in the 17 principles that would allow for all these harmful landfills and incinerators to be scattered and in communities in an equitable way. By saying that you are equally exposing people to toxics is not saying that you're achieving environmental justice. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. And what environmental justice is really calling for is a much deeper meaning. And it recognizes that in order for it to really be achieved, these industries need not to exist in order for environmental justice to really be achieved in our communities. And again, we want to just acknowledge that EPA has had a history of environmental racism through their practice. They have a long history of ignoring complaints on environmental justice. Here are some examples of other practices where we know that EPA has taken longer to get around to cleaning up toxic waste sites in communities of color. Penalties under hazardous waste laws were 5 times higher in white communities. Penalties were 46% higher for other programs relating to air, water, and waste. Again, 95% of environmental justice complaints filed between 1996 through mid-2013 have been rejected or dismissed. So there is a lot of reforming that needs to be done. And it's organizations like us, organizations on the ground, who are recognizing these instances where environmental racism is taking place, that are allowing us to push the needle and make these changes so our leadership can recognize the direction that we really need to move in order to reach environmental race, or in order to reach environmental justice in our community. Just to reiterate again, environmental justice is not the same as environmental equity. Environmental equity, again, and this goes back to the EPA definition, equates to poisoning people equally. But what we need is to stop poisoning people, period. So this is a movement that is not just the NIMBY movement, not just in our backyard, but we don't want these facilities in anyone's backyard. And on that note, just as an example to share, our group, WASS, as well as Energy Justice Network, and a number of other organizations, 274 organizations to be exact, have been pushing the EPA to update the overdue municipal waste combustor standards, so the standards that have been put forth on incinerators, and to close various loopholes that facilitate excessive pollution and perpetuate rather egregious acts of environmental racism. So we are working to change kind of the mainstream understanding on where incinerators kind of lie in the waste hierarchy, and our understanding of the detrimental impacts that they play in the communities where they live, where they're hosted. But this is something that we need your help on, that we need to continue to educate the community on here in Westchester, our leaders in county and state government, and something that we hopefully look forward to working with you all in the future. And on that note, I'm going to send it over to Raya. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I'd like to call Raya Salter and Lisa Burton, our two guest speakers, to talk a little bit more. I believe Raya Salter will be first. We're very lucky.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you so much for being on.
And Lisa, you here too? All right. Well, if she's not,
I'm here.
She's there. All right. So yes, I'm going to speak for about just about 8 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to Lisa. Now, can folks see me?
We can see you, yes.
All right. So I want to say hello, good evening. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that excellent background and grounding in environmental justice. I'm here for the accountability and the messaging about the Environmental Protection Agency. This is good framing. There's a lot to learn and understand about movements, how we work ethically together in solidarity, how we center the frontline voices, what environmental justice means, and happy to be a part of that conversation today and really continue that conversation today, which will then be further continued by Lisa, because I'm going to touch on some of the things that Vanessa spoke about. All right, let's see. Can we do a slideshow? Okay, we got it. All right. So yes, it is that short month when Black people are allowed to say Black and talk about Black history, Black people, and Black things. Hello, I am here to do some of that and talk about it in the context of environmental racism, New York's challenge and opportunity for this here group, and I'm excited. Now, is my box blocking stuff, or can you see everything okay? Okay, all right.
Nope, everything's fine.
All right, thank you. And again, let me keep it moving because I want to be brief. If I can keep it moving. Just a word about, so yes, I'm Raya Salter. I know a lot of folks on this call. I'm a guest speaker, but I'm also a compadre, somebody working in solidarity with a lot of you. A lot of you know me in one way or another. I'm an attorney. I am on the Climate Action Council, and I'm also the executive director and the founder of a group called the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center. And we are really the first energy justice public interest law firm. We're trying to bring that energy law and policy, like the Energy Justice Network and others do this pieces, but we're focused on community lawyering, energy law and policy support, on the local, regional, and national scale. So I just wanted to say hello, check out the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center. We're new, but mighty, and are here to work with all of you. All right, so let's go ahead and say a few things. Now, Vanessa talked about this already. And it's okay to keep talking about it because there's nothing in opposite to what she said, to what I'm going to say. Lisa will say a little bit more. These are big definitions. And so here, yes, we're getting at that concept she talked about. What is environmental racism? Unequal enforcement and protection of environmental laws based on race, unequal distribution of environmental harms and benefits based on race. When you have those things, among others, you have environmental racism. So what is environmental justice? Well, we're looking to address that, centering local communities speaking for themselves. That's something, I mean, we could speak about the James principles, ways of organizing, the importance of centering frontline voices and allowing folks to speak for themselves. All right, so environmental racism, right? This didn't come out of nowhere, right? We have a history of enslavement, of Black people, enslavement, land theft, environmental degradation, of course, indigenous genocide. Like, this is, the history of the United States. And it's also this legacy of racial and economic injustice, right? Like, I think we've been hearing more about that and learning more about that. Redlining, segregation, housing injustice, the prison industrial complex, and of course, very importantly, infrastructure siting. I wanted to quote Chico Mendes, who was a Brazilian Amazon forest defender who was murdered in 1988. And he said, environmentalism without class struggle is gardening. Okay, I think that's and look, gardening is a wonderful thing. And if gardening is what you're about, I'm not against gardening, but I think it's a really powerful quote, about the roots of these issues. They lie in racial and economic injustice. And that's when you hear activists saying climate justice is racial justice, is social justice. It is these intertwined pieces. That's what we're talking about. And of course, this coalition and a lot of my work is focused very much on that infrastructure siting, right? You have ongoing segregation, and it's very much linked to zoning is how that plays out. I'm going to talk a bit more about that. Lisa's going to talk about it on a hyper local level. But let's think about it as a national issue. So this was a 2021 study. This was from a Guardian article. The New York Times covered this, that Black Americans of all income levels are exposed to more air pollution sources from every single source. And yes, followed by, and it won't surprise, in the United States anyway, Latinx folks and other people of color. But we're talking about every single source. And when you start thinking about that, it's awe-inspiring, right? You're talking about trucks, you're talking about traffic, you're talking about highways, you're talking about the power plant that you live in proximity to. You're talking about the fuel that your building burns. You're talking about the mold and the pests that are inside the environment of a building. We're talking about the restaurant that may be located next door. We're talking about the manufacturing facilities that are next door. The concentration of toxic and poisons of Black people in particular, and also other people of color, really is staggering. And that water, paint, it really is staggering. And so I want to focus in a little bit on something that I know this coalition is thinking about. Part of it is power plants and also air quality. These are things that I'm also in my work, and Lisa and others are also very focused on. So let's talk about how this infrastructure siting manifests environmental racism in New York State. So this is a map. The green are gas-fired fossil fuel facilities, and then you've got biomass in brown and other types of fossil fuel. And so it's not, and obviously, to the point Vanessa made, we need to move away from all of these fossil fuels, all of them. But it's very much worth noting, look at where those dots, it's like a bubble gum machine, right? Right around New York City, right? That's because there are over 50 fossil fuel fired peaker plants. These are the dirtiest facilities in the state, in New York City in particular. 750,000 people live within 1 mile of one of these plants, and 78% of them are either low income or people of color. So this is, we're talking about these power plants and how this particular piece of infrastructure is sited. This, again, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about these federal and local mapping tools. Just an example, New Rochelle, both the federal and state mapping tools, if you look at these boundaries of New Rochelle, this is where the Black and Latinx communities are located. Also mentioning, and this is something I want everyone on this call to be aware of, and I want us to work in solidarity together about, but pursuant to the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the state is doing very sophisticated air monitoring in New York State. They have these incredibly sophisticated sensors on these cars, and they just drive and all around, but they picked initial places to pilot. They picked swaths of southern Westchester is one of them, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, and some parts of New Rochelle. So I want folks to know that this is happening. But I also, while they did not choose Peekskill and they didn't choose a lot of other communities, that we will work in solidarity on these air quality issues, because we know about the Wheelabrator being an issue. We know that the power plants are an issue. We know that the peaker plants are an issue. We know that the cars are an issue. And we know that the air quality in Westchester has gotten a failing grade from the American Lung Association every year for as long as I can remember. So this is something that this issue of air monitoring is something that we really, I want us to work on together. There's so many things to talk about in terms of what the state is doing and the law, but we don't have a lot of time. Environmental justice. We need equal justice, equal protection, equal enforcement. We need a just and equitable distribution of benefits and harms, but a reduction of environmental harms, just like Jessica said. And it's important to note that remediation has to take a look at cumulative impacts. That is a key environmental justice term. It means that we didn't get here overnight, right? We talked about enslavement. We talked about redlining, and these things and these infrastructure, the gas plants, the manufacturing facilities, the highways, the decimation, the displacement, that happened over generations. And so this remediation needs to understand that and really take that on. So what are we doing right here now together? We're recognizing that direct connection between the power plants, the pollution, the waste, air quality, and environmental injustice. What are we going to do? We're going to work together in solidarity, intersectionally on our issues, to try and move the needle in New York State. There's a lot to be said about what the state is doing, the CLCPA, the law, the Climate Action Council, the DEC. We're going to keep talking about all those things, and I'm here to talk about them as folks want to talk about them more. We're going to hold ourselves, but the state, ourselves accountable, but the state and the feds, and we're going to hold them accountable. And EJLPC is very focused on coalition building and organizing to shut these facilities down through a just transition. All those things could be the topic of a whole nother talk. But the good thing, you can always count on me to come in under time. So with that, I will say goodbye. Take a note of my email. I'll put it in the chat. Just, hit me up. We'll stay in touch. Lisa's going to talk. We're going to hand it over to Lisa. She's going to talk more about some local issues. You can hit her up too. And with that, I will stop and I will pass it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Raya. Can I share my screen? Maybe not. Well,
you should be able to, Lisa. It's for screen sharing, it should be all participants are able to.
I sadly went and upgraded my Zoom right before.
Do you want to
no,
email?
I think I'm okay.
Yay, yes, we're seeing it.
Here we go. Okay. Yeah, one should never upgrade anything ever before starting something new, that's for sure. Anyway, thank you for inviting me to this. I call myself an accidental environmentalist because, quite frankly, I just wasn't aware of so many issues, and every now and then people should have an epiphany, and a drive through Starbucks was my epiphany. So I just want to take you briefly through my journey of enlightenment. So I think everyone has done a really great job talking about environmental racism and environmental justice. And, you know, I use the Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice definition about environmental racism in terms of the disproportional impact of environmental hazards on people of color, which doesn't mean that it's only people of color in this country that have are impacted by toxics and toxic wastes and questionable zoning, but it's just the preponderance of it. And more often than not, in conversations that I've had, people want to talk about environmental justice, which is, again, the movement to respond to environmental racism. But what I found in my hometown is that environmental racism has not gone away. It didn't, you know, we didn't have a pin in it that said, all right, well, you know, from this point forward, there'll be no environmental racism. What we have to concentrate is on justice. That's just not the case. So the story is that in 2021 in New Rochelle, after declaring a climate emergency, and they, you know, it was a lovely resolution. It mirrored what the Paris Agreement said, and all this energy, and everyone patted themselves on the back. Then 3 or 4 weeks later, they literally changed the zoning laws in New Rochelle to say that there could be a drive-through next to multifamily homes. They specifically carved out single and two-family housing, which in New Rochelle, the predominant number of those single-family houses belongs to white people. And they did it because a developer wanted to build a Starbucks, a drive-through Starbucks, on a piece of property that would put the lane for the drive-through 6 feet from a walk-up old stock apartment that now houses emergency family, for, you know, homeless emergency family shelter, and the last of our New Rochelle municipal housing complex would be less than 10 feet away. It was so outrageous. I mean, I remember sitting at the light of the corner of Echo and Huguenot thinking, this will never pass. I wonder why they even bothered to bring it before council. Why, you know, this will never pass. And then it passed. And not only did it pass, it was a unanimous vote. We had people there. We had doctors. Raya, that's how I met Raya. She came out and to speak out against this. And not only did it pass unanimously through city council, it passed through our planning board as well. And this is the site. It looks kind of different, but where you see the wall, that's where the line of cars will be. And those windows on the right-hand side, that's the emergency family shelter that WASS runs. And on the left, that's the Bracy apartment. And what the red fencing up above the parking lot is where there's picnic tables that seniors sit out, and the kids play basketball. It's so outrageous. But this is what is the norm. Because what do you call it when really good people, when people who can talk about the climate crisis, who want to organize around the city and the county, you know, moving towards a more green environment, who want all these wonderful things, can do this specifically to one neighborhood? What does that mean? I mean, there is a conversation that says that racism is a mental health disease. And it really is, because there's a level of cognizant dissonance that says, on the one hand, we want a green planet and we want to save the environment, but we can allow this to happen. So part of being an anti-racist is that we organize. We see something, we organize, and you have to learn from history. And in New Rochelle, we are really blessed to have a wealth of really talented neighbors and such. So, you know, we were very methodical. We got in touch with the EPA and their environmental justice, their regional group, which is kind of a quirky group of folks. You know, they've been around since 1990. And when we say, well, is this environmental racist? You're showing us this map and it tells us where all these gas and oil tankers that had been in the downtown New Rochelle and the Black community are still there and might be leaking. You know, how does this work? And they tell us, well, environmental racism, it depends on what you want to call it, you know, which is like this really kind of soft stuff. So it's like, okay. But you know, but we use their tools to see what the 100-year flood map looked like. And so we can question, why would the city make these horrible changes in our streetscape when flooding is going to happen? And this is where our most vulnerable citizens are living. Why are these tanks from the 1890s still in place? Why are they allowed to be here? So we did a series of learning modules, and one of them was on the impact of health, because there's always this pushback about, oh, it's so expensive to do X, Y, and Z. It's expensive to have, remediation, but no one kind of thinks about, well, what is the expense to our school system when we have kids who are out constantly for asthma? What is the impact on our community when we have people in the emergency room who are struggling to breathe? What is the impact on jobs and every other piece of our society that relies on people to be healthy and in place when the environment is killing them? We also talked about, kind of what does environmental justice look like? And we were trying to engage our entire community on this issue, because it wasn't just this one corner. It wasn't just this one group of people that were being impacted. It was just kind of the story of New Rochelle and its relationship to African-American community. And that's where we not stumbled, but where we really dug down on the history of Pugsley Hollow. Pugsley Hollow, and then we did our environmental tour, but Pugsley Hollow was one of the first African-American neighborhoods in New Rochelle. They were enslaved people who gained their freedom well in advance of slavery ending in New York State. They settled on a piece of land near Cedar Street and River Street in New Rochelle. And from 1800s forward, every piece of, the gas company, the rail yards, the damming of fresh water, all takes place in this one community where these African Americans lived. Their zoning for bars and all this kind of just crap is focused there until the 1950s and 60s, when urban renewal comes in and literally removes every trace of a thriving Black community. So it's hard to kind of listen to this and know this and not kind of want to pull your hair out. So we want to do joyous organizing. So we hired Dolly the Trolley, because Dolly the Trolley usually comes around New Rochelle to do the arts tour, but we had the trolley come through to do an environmental racist tour. The young man on the right here, our docet, dressed up as a conductor from the 1800s. We had about 75 people, 2 tours, going around town, where we kind of gave the history of how redlining impacted Black neighborhoods in New Rochelle, how communities that had been middle class, with a stroke of the pen, became commercial. And with that commercial and light industry, everything changed. We have a community, City Park, where literally there can be no more housing. They built public housing there, deemed it light industry and commercial. No new residential buildings can go up, and yet those people are still there. They're across the street from a bus depot that leaks oil all the time. The flooding is amazing now that the weather is changing, and still that is where we house people who require subsidized housing. So our happy activists, we had a ton of people. We had our congressman come out, we had News 12 come out, we had banners, we had signs. We were so fierce in our determination to let people know that this was not right. We only had, however, 2 public elected officials come. One was our congressman and one was our county legislator. And one person from planning, who subsequently was not allowed to remain on the community board. So we don't know what that's all about, but but we were undaunted, because in 2022, we also had a Earth Day rally, and that Raya led, and we did a walking tour. And again, we told the story and the history of Pugsley Hollow. We had our high school AP environmental group come out and talk about what they found when they were testing the water in our schools. We had the conservationists come out. We had the air quality people come out. We had everyone come out except our elected officials. And we have an overlay zone system in place in New Rochelle, where if you want to put up something, you just have to kind of check some boxes, and it goes to planning. And if planning says you correctly checked certain boxes, it goes up, and public input is non-existent. And this is apparently the model by which they want us to move forward in New Rochelle. So this is our Earth Day. I think we had about 100 people out there, mostly families, because it's Earth Day, right? And we all want to understand kind of our relationship to the earth and how we can make our city better. And yet we allow certain things to continue. We allow overlay zones to dictate how many, how traffic calming means expanding the lanes of traffic. That's the most important thing. But I will share these kind of notations. We had a brief history of redlining. We can show you the redlining maps and the impact, because it's not by accident that when the rail yards are built, they're built in a Black neighborhood. When the largest cloverleaf exit for I-95 is built, it tears through literally 300 homes and businesses of predominantly African Americans. When the oil and gas tanks are at one time in the downtown, they're moved, and they're moved specifically within a block of the then Negro school and the Black churches that were in those areas. So when environmental racism pretty much is from the time of our being in the United States. It's not an accident, and it is so pervasive. It's kind of hard to imagine. I'm trying to stop sharing, and I don't see how I can do that.
You did.
You
Okay,
have.
great. Okay, so I guess my story ends with the fact that along the way, I've met some really great people in this work. I've been amazed at how my neighbors can galvanize around it. I now have an understanding that it is not poverty that dictates poor living conditions, because quite frankly, I've always thought that the price of poverty in this country was that you live next to the, the off-ramp to the George Washington Bridge. The price of poverty is that, you live where it floods all the time. The price of poverty is that, you can't open your windows because there's so many cars going by. But that's not the price of poverty. That is a public policy decision. That's a public policy decision that says that some of us are not worthy of clean air and clean water. That's a public policy decision that says that certain people, we don't care how they live. That the standard of living for our community is bifurcated by who we deem worthy and who we deem unworthy. And that is where it needs to be redefined. We cannot have, when they were applying for this Starbucks drive-through, they checked the box saying that there would be no environmental impact on the community there, because there were 2 other drive-throughs that, again, 1,000 cuts, they had allowed it, so therefore, what's one more? That can't be the answer. That simply can't be the answer. So, our humanity is always at risk with racism. When you can turn a blind eye to one group of people, it becomes increasingly easy to turn multiple blind eyes. And then before you know it, we are barbarians, and that is not the idea. So I think that's the end of my little, my story of New Rochelle and how, yes, sacrifice zones are created when people overlook the humanity of their neighborhood. And in New Rochelle, we are so, like I said, cognizant dissidents. We celebrate our diversity, but we don't understand why asthma rates are so high in the downtown that is literally strangling the communities that have been there since the 30s. It was not as if they went from tree-lined streets to 4-lane highways to nowhere and clover leaves off of I-95. And we don't question that. We look at it and we see it and we don't question it. So my challenge to everyone is to kind of go and see with new eyes where people are living and where we're okay with them living. Right now, New Rochelle is booming. Downtown is booming. We have 18 buildings up, and you can see them from the Frog's Neck Bridge. You know where New Rochelle is. But the fact of the matter is more than half of them have above ground parking garages that are abutting old stock housing. So on the corner of Center and Huguenot, a 4-story walk-up building that has been there since the 1920s now has a 4-story parking garage literally right next to their windows.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you so much, Raya, for sharing your story, sharing your knowledge. I think I could speak for everyone. That was truly inspiring to hear. And I really agree with the sentiment that all these instances of environmental racism, it's not a personal failure of ourselves, it's a policy failure. And one that we have power in changing if we come together and collectively act to ensure that environmental justice can be seen in our communities. Now, I just want to update folks. We will be closing up shortly. I promise we won't be going past 8:45. But before we move on to the agenda, I do want to give folks some time or the opportunity to ask a couple questions. Are there any questions that we have for our guest speakers? Either Raya or Lisa? I'm seeing some thank yous in the chat. Okay. If there are no questions for Raya or Lisa, we will be sending along their presentations in a follow-up email, so look out for that. as well as their contact information. So feel free to reach out to them. And now I'm going to turn it over to Courtney, who's going to be leading us through a little interactive exercise. We'll be taking a look at our census tracts across New York State and talking about disadvantaged communities. Courtney, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. So what I'd like for us to do now is sorry, I'm just trying to change the pin so that I can be on the video since we are recording right now. So I'm going to show you that, I think we're going to take a look. We just heard all this about environmental justice. We're going to actually look at some EJ communities and look at the differences between our communities. So Mike, if you could drop that link in the chat, that would be useful. And folks can go ahead and look at my screen, which I'm sorry is so busy. I was pulling up the info on all right. So what I'd like for us to look at is the disadvantaged communities map, and my computer's trying to help me by automatically making the screen sharing the windows. So are you seeing like the Zoom stuff, or you're just seeing the window with the browser, Vanessa?
Yeah, now we see the full screen.
Okay, so this link is the one that's going to get dropped in the chat, and it's going to take you to this website, the Climate Justice Working Group website. And if you scroll down, you will see this map. And if you click on the map, there's a little magnifying glass in the upper left, and you can put in your address, or not your address, but like your city, and see what comes up. So I've already put in my city. So here's Peekskill. And it helpfully totally reset, even though I did this ahead of time to avoid this. So if I'm going to put in my address or my city, and it's going to bring me there. And then if I mouse over it with my mouse, you can see what pops up. This is my census tract, and it names the census tract, and then it says it's designated a draft DAC, which stands for disadvantaged community. And the environmental burden is higher than 98% of census tracts statewide. And the population vulnerability is higher than 84% of census tracts statewide. And if I then click on that, it opens up this infographic at the bottom. And the left in blue are those population vulnerabilities. So, how many asthma visits to the emergency room, how many people are living in energy poverty or have a cost burden of paying for electricity, housing stock. Lisa mentioned housing stock, homes built before 1960. So on the left are those things like, are you an English? Do you speak English proficiently? What is your demographics, household incomes, right? So when you combine these vulnerability scores on the left with the environmental burden on the right, and you can see industrial, can see where is this burden coming from? And for Peekskill, my census tract, municipal waste combustors, we all know what that is, right? That's the trash incinerator, and this is how much it's contributing to our risk. So percentile ranking of the amount of that census tract within 500 meters of a municipal waste combustor. So hopefully someone dropped the link in the chat, and you can go look up your municipality. And then if someone wants to share what they're finding, please do. So here I had Yonkers and Bronxville. So if we go to Yonkers, And depending, you can mouse over a few different census tracts, but for instance, this tract in Yonkers, their environmental burden is higher than 95% of the census tracts. But if we go to, say, Scarsdale and look at their census tracts, you can see they're not disadvantaged community on the map, but they do have an environmental burden higher than 24% of the census tracts. But when you look at the population vulnerability, it's very, very low. They're not a vulnerable population, and that has to do with a lot of the of those things we spoke about, and Lisa mentioned cumulative impacts. So if you have old housing stock, you're living in poverty, you don't have access to standard medical care, or you can't afford HEPA filters in your house, and all of those things combine to add to that burden. So I was kind of surprised that on some of the data I found from here. So Bronxville is one of the richest towns in America, but they have a higher environmental burden than 63% of census tracts in New York. So pretty much all of Westchester is bearing a significant environmental impact burden. It's just the matter of how it's that cumulative aspect when it's combined with population vulnerability. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm wondering if anybody wants to, either by popping in the chat or by unmuting yourself and sharing, what were you surprised at the environmental burden for your community? Either it was higher than you expected or lower. Could you kind of see from these examples how the environmental burden along with that vulnerability aspect combines and makes that cumulative impact? Anybody want to share? Or drop in the chat? I guess not. All right. The link is, did the link get, yeah, it got dropped in the chat. Let's see. Yeah, so Raya, the map, that map is great. The other map from NYSERDA doesn't have any info with it. So I feel like I'm really afraid we should not lose this map. It is
No, it's all right. So yeah, NYSERDA had their map. Then the disadvantaged communities map that you're looking at was the draft criteria was created by the Climate Justice Working Group working with the DEC. And you don't have to worry, it's not going nowhere. It's by statute, it is rolling forward, and it will be used in, I can't tell you how excited I am to see you presenting this map to people. Very exciting. It will be used, as these indices that you're talking about. The idea is that they will be deployed in how state funds and other remediation is done and spent. And there is some overlap between these maps and the federal maps that are doing the exact same thing. And yes, you don't have to worry. The old DEC map is a thing. This is new. It's not going anywhere. And the Climate Justice Working Group this year will finalize this criteria that you're looking at now.
great. Yeah, so I encourage everybody to take a look. Yeah, so Natalie said, I do not live in a disadvantaged community in Yonkers, yet the environmental burden is 82% higher. So you're the 82nd percentile, kind of that burden is higher than 82% of the census tracts in New York. And so I think it really goes to show that it's this combination of environmental burden and financial vulnerabilities that combine. And so I think the other thing for us to remember, and so I did that example mainly so we'd all realize, there's that saying, we're not all in the same boat, we're all in the same storm. And some of us are in like a rickety dinghy, and some of us are in a mega yacht in Westchester, right? So we're all in the same storm, but those EJ communities are in the dinghy. And so if we address our waste problem. And that means, you know, with waste, that means every place has a DPW garage. Every community has to have all that infrastructure to drive the trucks around. It means there's a materials reclamation facility, and it's in Yonkers, and all of those. So, you know, if we can solve this waste problem and we can get ourselves towards zero waste, this is going to make the air better and alleviate the burden for everyone. But it's going to make the biggest difference for the folks living in those communities, or the folks, you know, my neighbors that are living around the trash incinerator. So, you know, I hope this was a useful exercise, and you can bookmark that map and kind of spend more time with it, because I think it really is what we're trying to do, which is make everyone's burden lighter, make everyone's air quality better. But really be focusing on, you know, where do we start? Start with the folks that are dealing with it, that have the worst of it. And those are those disadvantaged communities like Peekskill, like Yonkers, like Mount Vernon.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Really appreciate you going through that with us. And I definitely encourage folks to take a look at that map after this meeting as well, and continue to see how either the communities that they're living in or the other communities in Westchester have those compounding effects, whether it's their relation with their environmental burden in relation with their environmental or their vulnerability. And here in Peekskill, we know, as Courtney said, that we have a higher environmental burden, or our census tract has a higher environmental burden than 98% of the census tracts in New York State, and coupled with a high vulnerability, really makes the fact that we have a garbage incinerator in our community a public health crisis. So bring us back to kind of actions that we can take to take on this public health crisis, and start getting on the road where we phase out our wheel braider and see the end of garbage incineration. But we're going to need all of your help. So I'm going to just quickly share my screen again. Oop. Wrong one. Okay. So some of you may recognize the slide from our presentation last year. This is really kind of what we see as our plan. We need to sound the alarm because this really is a public health crisis for the Westchester community, but especially for the community of Peekskill, and those communities, those Black and Brown communities that are highly vulnerable to these toxics that don't see borders, right? Don't just stop at the boundaries of Peekskill or Cortland or any specific municipality. We know we have to put out the fire, and we have to work to rebuild the system. And there's going to be a number of steps that take place in between these the 3 steps we kind of have laid out here. But to start, we are, as you know, starting a campaign to urge our county to put their money where their mouth is and really invest in a consultant that can put together a comprehensive county-wide zero waste plan that really sets a goal of phasing out the garbage incinerator in the near future. And we need all of your help to show that the movement that we're growing around this campaign is broad-based, is not just limited to the folks in Peekskill, but is really an issue that so many of us care about across all of Westchester County. So we are asking you all tonight, before you leave, to take action in 3 different ways. First, we're asking you to sign our petition. We have just made our petition live a couple of days ago. Some of you may know that we commemorated the 39th birthday of Wheel Braider a couple of days ago over the weekend. And on that day, we made our petition live. We have been collecting signatures for a letter of support from organizations and elected officials, but now we're moving towards getting individual signatures as well. And we currently have 49 people on the call, so I hope that we can get 49 signatures added to this petition, and feel free to share it with your colleagues. I believe one of our folks from WASS will also be sharing it in the chat. Secondly, many of you represent conservation advisory councils, sustainability commissions, different organizations in your communities. Perhaps you are very close to a community leader or another organization that is community-based. We want your support. We want the support of your organization, again, because we are looking to build this broad-based movement, and we really want to show Westchester County government that we have support across the board. So if you have not yet signed your organization on to our letter requesting the Westchester BOL and our county executive to go ahead and do an RFP request for a countywide zero waste plan, please do so. If you are not the chair of your committee, if this is something that needs to be put on the agenda for a next CAC meeting, I urge you all to do so, and please reach out to us. We'd be happy to assist you with any background information. We'd be happy to come and join you at those meetings to answer any questions. But we really do want your support, and we want your organizational support as well. And third, we want your help in activating community leaders in this demand. So we have drafted template email language for you to send out to whether it's your local representatives. We already have mayors, town boards, and councils that have signed on in support of our RFP request. But again, we are looking to build that number, and we need your help. We know many of you have those relationships. So please do feel free to use our language and put this issue on your local elected's radar. And again, if there's any questions, any background information that you all need to provide in order to make your case to support our cause, we'll be happy to help you out and do that. So I'm going to give it a couple minutes for you all to go ahead and fill out that petition, perhaps fill out the Google form for the organizational sign-on, or to email that out to someone in your organization that might be able to move that along. Or to send out an email to your local elected to also sign on to the RFP request. And if you have done so already, feel free to put done in the chat. But otherwise, I'll give folks a couple minutes to go ahead and go through those documents.
And if folks have questions, feel free to unmute and ask.
Awesome. It looks like we've got folks who have gotten through the 3 actions. We really appreciate that. Give it a couple more minutes. Amazing. Thank you so much, John. John just said in the chat that their CAC has voted unanimously to ask our village board to sign on, and we'll let you know when it's on the agenda. We'll look forward to that. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. All right. Well, thank you all so much for taking action. As of right now, we do have over 50 organizations, elected officials that have signed on to our letter of support. And a lot of that is due to your outreach, you reaching out to your CACs, your sustainability commissions, your elected bodies, putting this issue on your radar. So for that, I want to thank you all. And again, encourage you all, if you have not already done so, to put this on the radar for your next CAC meeting, your next commission meeting, and we'll be happy to support you in providing those resources and answering any questions that your colleagues may have. So before we end, I just want to give folks another reminder that we want to remember the 3 Ps. This again was a slide that we shared last month, but I think is one that is pretty memorable and should be shared every time. We want to remember that the incineration is harming people. We have the largest industrial air polluter in the county right here in Peekskill, and for that reason and many other reasons, Westchester is getting an F on air quality from the American Lung Association. And as Raya said, we have gotten this F for as long as she can remember. We know that the planet, that the incinerator plant is also harming the planet, that emissions from the wheelbrader are contributing to climate change, and that the carbon emissions from burning garbage are much worse of that of burning coal, for example, or the environmental impacts are much worse of that of landfilling our waste. So this is absolutely the worst option of kind of disposing of our waste that we currently have available to us. And it's also hurting our pocketbook. Incineration is absolutely the most expensive way to manage waste. Our facility just turned 39 years this past week. It's one of the oldest facilities in the entire nation. If it fails, we are going to be on the hook for those costs. And quite frankly, we do need to just be thinking past garbage incineration, and it is the responsibility of Westchester County and our county leadership to do so. With that, I want to say thank you all so much for being here, for coming to our second task force meeting. Our next meeting will be taking place next month on March 8th at 7:30. Again, these meetings take place on the second Wednesday of the month at 7:30. They are recorded, so we will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording of this video, as well as resources to the different slide decks you saw from myself, as well as from the other speakers. And we look forward to having you all at our next meeting as we continue to work on our campaign. And though these first 2 meetings have been kind of very panel oriented and very presentation oriented, we are excited to take this task force into a direction where we hear more from you all. So thank you all so much for your time, for engaging in this issue. And we hope you all have a great night. See you all next month.
Vanessa, Natalie had a question in the chat. If there's a deadline for organizational sign-ons, and when will the letter go out? I don't think we have a deadline just yet. We're mainly waiting for to get a meeting with the county executive. And when we have that meeting, we want to bring him those organizational sign-ons. But I don't know that we'll ever close it. I think as our movement grows and more organizations become aware and they sign on, I think it's a good way to engage allies. So probably no deadline, but the sooner the better, because we are hoping to have a meeting sooner rather than later with the county executive and members of the Board of Legislators.
Thanks, Courtney. Well, with that, I want to wish you all a very good night. We hope to see you all next month at our next task force meeting. But in the meantime, we hope to hear from you all via email. And please let us know if there's any way that we can help move along sign on from your organization to help us in our request to have a comprehensive county-wide zero waste plan for Westchester done in the future.
Yeah, and we're grateful for all the oh, sorry, Vanessa. We're grateful for all the folks that are already working on this space and reducing waste. So if there are ways that we can support you, providing materials, or even like coming as a guest speaker, if you don't want to have to be the resource that knows all the facts, feel free to reach out to us. You have Vanessa's email and the WASS email. We can find a WASS community member that can, attend your meeting and support you in those efforts with gratitude.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And
Have a good
and a
night.
big thank you to Raya and Lisa for their very inspiring presentations as well. Have a good night, all.
Bye, you too.
Thank you.